Hello, everyone. Welcome to this episode of the Rencast. On this fine Saturday, we have Disenchantment that we're talking about. This is a show from the creator of both The Simpsons and Futurama, Matt Groening, whatever. And this show just hit Netflix just a few days ago, and I watched the whole thing, which I think I've seen more of Disenchantment than I've seen of The Simpsons and Futurama combined, not including The Simpsons movie, which I've both seen and own and think is hilarious. But I didn't really ever get into Futurama or The Simpsons, and mainly it was probably because when I was a young child, I wasn't really allowed to watch them, so I never had an interest growing up in it. And even now, I still can't say that I have a big interest in either show. I see why people love them. I see why The Simpsons is still an ongoing thing, because it very easily parodies modern America with all of its stereotypes and all of its political episodes. And so I get it. I get why a lot of people love the shows, but they're not really anything that I'm particularly looking for, and that may just be because TV shows in general, for me, are hard to get into. I really need to have odd and specific things in order to get into TV shows. Some of my favorite shows are Wilfred, Twin Peaks would be up there for sure, and Rick and Morty as well. I love those shows, but most modern popular TV shows I really do have a hard time with. I despise The Walking Dead. I think Game of Thrones is far too slow for its own good. And even like Better Call Saul, Breaking Bad, I'm just not that into. And when I watched Disenchantment, I kind of expected something similar. The trailer for the show was really bad, and I thought that the show was just going to be terrible. And so when I went into episode 1, I really expected something worse than it is, even though they have the writers and the creators and the directors all have the history with Futurama and The Simpsons. I really did expect this to not be very good. But while the first episode, the pilot, is pretty bad, I usually, when I try to watch TV shows, I'll watch the first 2 episodes, and if it doesn't hook me by that point, then I usually just turn it off. And the first episode is really not great, but the second episode's pretty good. And overall, I think the show is actually pretty good. I just finished watching the entire thing. It only took me a few days, actually, because there's only 10 episodes, 25 minutes each. It doesn't really take that long to get through everything. And I really do enjoy the show. I think it's solid, but I think it has a lot of issues, and they definitely haven't hit their stride yet. The reason, like I said, that I watch the first 2 episodes of every show I'm trying to at least get into, is because the pilot episode of every show is basically just the safest thing they could make that also gets the point across of what they're going for. Because the pilot episodes are just supposed to sell the show to a network. So they're typically much, much worse than what the show actually is. BoJack Horseman springs to mind as well. BoJack is a great show on Netflix, but the first episode is dreadful. So most of the time I give a season maybe 1 to maybe 3 episodes before I give up. And the first episode, even though I don't think it's that good, I really do enjoy a lot of it. And I think that is sort of reflexive of the entire season. I think there is a lot of great things in the show, but there is a lot that's holding it down. And we'll get into more of the stuff that I don't like about the show a little later, but we'll start off with some positives. The animation style, I actually really found myself liking. There's a weird blend between 2D animation and 3D animation that at first is incredibly jarring, but after a while, I thought it worked. I thought it worked pretty well, and it looks really great. All the animation is really sharp, everything's super fluid, it looks great. And I really like all of the character designs. I think every character fits their voice acting and the actual character that is written in the show pretty well. I really love all the diverse characters in it. I love the modeling. I really think the animators did a great job. And the world itself, too, looks really nice. There's a lot of, like, world building that's going on throughout this season. And I think that is sort of the point of this first season, is just to sort of etch this world, and then they can maybe fill in the details as they go along. And I like that approach. I think it works. I also like most of the voice actors. I think the highlight is John DiMaggio, or however you pronounce his name. He plays King Zog in the show, and he also plays Jake the dog on Adventure Time. I think his voice acting is by far the highlight of the show, as well as the character that he plays, the king. I think the king's character is by far and away the most interesting character on the show so far. I think he has the most depth, he has the most interesting things going on about him, and he has the most that they did with. He's the character that they did the most with. They fleshed out his backstory. They tell you his motivations for the whole season. Everything is very well done with him. I really, really like this character, and anytime he was on screen, the show is better, honestly. And it's, again, not just because of the character itself, but the voice acting. I think DiMaggio really brings a lot to it. He still has that kind of Jake the Dog sound to him, but I really do like the way he delivers his lines. I like the way he kind of carries the voice, carries the character in a way. I think he does an excellent job with this character. But again, I think he is the best part of the show so far, King Zog and John DiMaggio. I think this character and this performance is easily the highlight, easily the standout, and I'm really interested to see what they'll do with him going forward, because in the last episode, he sort of loses everyone that he cares about, and he loses everything that he cares about. And so I really think that this character will be the show's highlight going forward as well. There's a lot of other characters that are kind of in the forefront as well that are just not nearly as interesting as him. Even the main character, which I can get into more later, I don't like as much as him. I really don't. And one character that I thought I would really not like going forward was Elfo, the character played by Nat Faxon, who was in movies like The Way, Way Back, and he's a good actor in his own right, and a talented voice actor as well. And I really expected not to like his character, Elfo, because it's like the typical fish out of water kind of character, where he just says dumb things and does dumb things and is just sort of ignorant. And I really expected him to be this horrible comedy relief that they could just insert whenever they needed to. And I was happy that that didn't turn out that way. I think that they do give him enough to work with, and I think the character, his arc throughout the show, is more interesting than I expected it to be, although it's really not that deep. It is more interesting than I expected it to be, and I ended up actually liking the character in the end, and I think Nat Faxon does a good job with his performance as well. I think he's an interesting character here, and the jokes I think work pretty well too. There are some lazy, simplistic jokes all over throughout the season, because just like the pilot episode, season 1 of most shows is meant to be this simplistic, safe, risk-free thing that will attract the most amount of people. So the first, second, and maybe even third season of most shows don't get off the ground stylistically, artistically, until that point, because they're just trying to rope people in and seeing if it is actually something that will be marketable and profitable. So while the jokes don't always land, I would say about 60% of the jokes do not land at all in the show. 40% are pretty funny to outright hilarious. There are a lot of jokes in the show that I laughed out loud just watching it on my own. And there is one or two that I had gut-busting laughter to. There's one where the prince that was originally going to marry our main character, he stabs himself in the head. And throughout the show, it's this running gag that everyone thinks he's dead, but he's still alive. And then they give him this amulet that restores his life, and then it stops working mid giving him life, and his brain just falls out, and then he stabs himself through the heart, and then that character never comes back up. And I laughed so hard I thought I was going to throw up. it was hilarious. And then there's a joke in the pilot episode where the elves are all singing as they make candy, and then they decide to try to hang Elfo, and it cuts from them saying, we're going to hang you, to the hanging tree, and they're putting him up on this noose, and meanwhile, the elves are singing the same song they were singing while they're making candy, and it's a super upbeat, like, do-do-do-do-do-do-do-do, and they're singing about hanging him, and I thought that was hilarious. There's some great juxtaposition jokes. Wow, that was hard to get out. There's some great one-liners. I think the show really does have everything. Great visual humor, great one-liners again. There's one when they jump a carriage over like a pond, and the carriage starts sinking, and a lady says, "Help, I'm drowning." And Elfo turns around and says, "Hi, I'm Elfo," and then walks off, and the lady dies. And I really appreciate the show's commitment to some of its jokes. There's a lot of shows out there, like Family Guy specifically, where they make a joke about a character or about somebody dying or something, or about someone being deformed, and then they make that joke and show the character having something happen to them, and then they'll just be fine in the next scene. And I really, really appreciated Disenchantment's commitment to its jokes. There's a character that's like the right-hand man to the king, who seems normal throughout the show, and then he takes off his little hat and he has a third eye, and for the rest of the show, he just has a third eye. And I really expected it to be a Family Guy kind of joke where he's like, oh, he has a third eye, and then he just doesn't later. But no, he has it throughout the whole show, and there's a lot of little jokes like that, little visual gags like that the show really commits to, and I appreciated that. I appreciated that they went all out for the humor, and every time that something like that comes up as a reoccurring gag, it's funny almost every single time, because they're just committing fully to it. And I really, really liked that about the show. It's probably my favorite part of the show, is just the commitment to the humor. And that's not to say that this show always works, because it doesn't. As I've said before, it very much doesn't sometimes. There's some episodes that really don't work at all. But I think that mainly has to do with the fact that the setting, while I like, and the story is not that interesting. The story and the actual setting of everything is kind of done to death, where somebody is forced into marriage and doesn't want to be, and then they go find their one true love, which hasn't happened in this show so far, which I have liked. But I mean, Aladdin did this. So many shows like Aladdin have happened where somebody's forced into something they don't want to do, and then chaos ensues from there. And that's exactly what this show is. The first episode is the main character, whose name is Bean. She's being forced to get married, and she doesn't want to, so she runs away, and then things happen, and chaos ensues. It's this incredibly simplistic story, and I think, like I said, I haven't watched a lot of Simpsons, but from what I gather about The Simpsons, it's just like episodic, where an episode will happen, and then the next episode will happen, and they'll be sort of unrelated to each other. And I could be wrong about that, because I haven't seen a lot of it, but Disenchantment has an overarching story throughout the entire season, leading up to a certain point, and it just is not very good. And I think it really starts in episode 1, unfortunately, with the forced marriage thing that's incredibly cliche at this point. And then, not only that, but Eric Andre, who plays a little demon character called Lucy in the show, is probably the worst character. And that sucks, because I love Eric Andre. I think he's hilarious. I think the Eric Andre show is amazing. He is one of the funniest guys in show business right now, but he's not a voice actor. Just straight up, he's not a voice actor, and his voice acting is not very good. And I think casting him was both a business decision, because it made me want to watch it, but I think it was not a great idea. It was definitely a business decision, but it wasn't a good idea. I would have liked to see really maybe even Seth MacFarlane in the role. I don't like Seth MacFarlane at all, but even he might have been better. I think bringing in John DiMaggio, who plays King Zog, just to do him as well would be awesome. I think he would do a great job. But that's not to say that Eric Andre's bad. I think he's acceptable, but when compared to the rest of this talented cast, he really does stand out as not very good. And I'm not sure if the writers realized this as they were going forward, because Lucy's character goes from a sort of pivotal character in the first few episodes to basically non-existent towards the end. He doesn't have that much to do, because he is put on Bean, Princess Bean, as a curse. He's cursed to be with her for time and all eternity, to make her do bad things. And that is connected to this subplot with these two wizards who are watching Bean, and they put the demon on her to try and make her turn evil, is what it seems like in the first episode or two. But of course they have a secret plan that they're trying to accomplish, and by the end of the season they do. But it feels unrelated to the demon, the whole plan. By the end of the season, the demon is completely disconnected, it feels like, to these wizards that want to try and overthrow Dreamland. And that sucks. I think when he had more of a role, I liked Lucy. In the first few episodes, I think there are some pretty great gags that they have with him, where he's trying to make her do bad things. But towards the end, he just kind of becomes a glorified shoulder angel, like in Emperor's New Groove with Kronk. That's sort of all his character ends up being. And that was really disappointing, because in the first few episodes, he does seem like legitimately trying to make her do horrible things and leading her down a bad path. And I liked that. And I liked that they're going to have this character, that they had the guts to have this character that wasn't a good person attached to our main character, making her do bad things. And then by the end, he is just kind of a mixed character. They get attached to him, and he gets attached to them for reasons I don't quite understand. And then he doesn't do bad things by the end. He just kind of says things that would be perceived as bad. By the end, it's just like he says the opposite of what Elfo says, and that's his whole character. And that sucked. I really, really did not like that character very much. And the whole plot that these wizards have to overthrow Dreamland feels so convoluted, and it feels like it has way too many X factors with it, where their whole plan was to, I guess, turn Bean into a bad person, and then they would use that to their advantage somehow, which doesn't make much sense, because that doesn't happen. And then by the end, it turns out that they wanted Bean and her dad, King Zog, to get this infinity amulet that would give somebody infinite life, eternal life, or bring someone back to life. And they plan to have them find this amulet, which they do, let them have it, which they do, and then they want her to bring it back and put it on the stone statue of her mother, which is actually just her mother, but she was poisoned and turned to stone. And so their plan was to let her have this amulet, and then to have her put it on the stone statue of her mom, that up until like 5 minutes before she does it, she doesn't know that it's her mom, and her Elfo gets killed. So the whole time I was thinking, oh, she's just going to put the amulet on Elfo. And when she doesn't, she puts it on the statue. I was legitimately surprised. I was like, oh, that's a surprise. I really didn't think she would do that. But turns out that that was just directly linked to these wizards and their plan to overthrow the kingdom. And because turns out that Bean's mom was actually a villain that tried to poison the king and ended up accidentally poisoning herself because Bean changed the glasses around. It's so convoluted to the point where feels completely unnecessary. I think if they simply just had her put it on Elfo, as everyone predicted would happen, I think that would have been okay. I think that would have actually maybe worked better, and then you would have this evil wizard's plan maybe developing better into season 2. But as it stands, it feels like the last episode of the season is a big mess of ideas that they had for the season that they just kind of had to throw together because they didn't really know what to do with it or where to go with it. And that ended up feeling less like a cliffhanger because they leave you on this thing where it's like the mom of Bean is taking Bean with her and she's going to bring destruction to Dreamland and start a new world or something, and they're going to rule side by side. And it's supposed to be this like cliffhanger where King Zod is the only survivor of King Zog, not Zod, is the only survivor in Dreamland, and Bean and his wife escape. And then his other wife, Queen Una, is like rallying forces against them. And I guess that was their whole plan too. I really don't know. I'm completely lost on the point of everything with the show. I don't understand. I don't understand what they were going for. It just doesn't make that much sense to me. And it feels like this big cliffhanger that they try to leave you on, and yet I don't feel like I'm anxious to see where it goes next, because I feel like it's just going to resolve itself in the first episode of season 2, and they'll say, that was a thing that happened, now we're going to move on with something completely different. It feels like that, and that happens a lot in TV shows, and it's really obnoxious. That's what happened with Stranger Things, where it's like, okay, we're wrapping up, but we're supposed to leave you on a cliffhanger, and now we're going to just go into something different. And that's why I didn't watch Stranger Things 2, because I just did not care about the story going forward, because it feels like it's over. And Disenchantment kind of felt like it was over after the second to last episode. I was like, okay, they're going to have a cliffhanger here where she puts the amulet on her mom and brings her back to life instead of Elfo. And then it just kind of keeps going into this convoluted mess. And yeah, I don't know. It's a strange thing. The story itself is so cliched, predictable, and convoluted to the point where I don't think I want to rewatch season 1. There are episodes that I liked better than others that I might rewatch. There are characters in episodes that I liked than other characters in other episodes. Like, I think the Exorcist guy that gets his hand cut off twice is a great character. I really liked all of the episodes with him. But there are other characters that I'm just like, I don't care. And I think another issue that I have with the show is its sound design. I hope that this gets fixed going forward, but in the first more than half the show, the sound design is absolutely atrocious. The first episode has this big war scene between these dwarves and these giants, and the sound design is so bad that it's laughable. And there are other montages where people are running from other people and a song comes on and all the sound gets drowned out and it's only the song. But then you hear these random sounds. You don't hear people running, you don't hear things clanking into each other, but you hear when a character jumps onto a thing and wood creaks. It just sounds so terrible. I really don't know what happened with how obviously expensive the show is and how many great, talented people that are on the show. I don't know how this happens. And I hope going forward that both that gets fixed and the writers get a better story. Those are my main complaints. The sound design and the story. Those are the big complaints for me. Because, the story obviously is a huge complaint. Because it is the central part of the show. If this was just an episodic thing, then that wouldn't be an issue. And if things just sort of happened episode to episode, even if they had a season finale that was unrelated, that was going to go into season 2, that would have been fine. But as it stands, it's this overarching story that is just a complete disaster. And the only thing that kind of glues everything together is the voice cast and the humor. The writing itself isn't really that great, and I think the main character, Bean, is not that interesting. I think the writing on her character is incredibly cliche, where all she is a rebel princess. That is her character, Rebel Princess 101. She is not interesting. Not interesting at all. The only thing that makes her character work is the fact that she has shoulder angels in Lucy and Elfo, because those two characters, the dynamic between those two and her, make the show work. But on their own, all three of those characters are not interesting. Like I said, Lucy is probably my least favorite character in the show. Elfo is a glorified comedic relief character, and Bean is a cliched stereotype. So I really don't like these characters, and I really don't like the show. But again, the thing that makes it work is how good the voice cast is, how good the humor is, and I honestly think John DiMaggio really brings the show, he elevates it a lot. I think King Zog, the writing on King Zog, and the performance of King Zog elevates the show entirely. And maybe the writers realized that Lucy was less interesting than the king, and so they amped up his role and degraded Lucy's role, because like near the end of the show, it starts going into this king's backstory and some of his motives more. And so I kind of feel like maybe the writers panicked a little bit and just rewrote some characters here and there. It does feel like that, and that's a little disappointing as well. So going forward, I do want to see where the show goes. I really probably won't talk about TV that much because, like I said earlier, I don't care. I don't like TV shows very much. I have a hard time getting into them. But Season 2, I'll be looking forward to mildly of Disenchantment. If I watch the first episode of Season 2 and I really don't like it, then I probably won't finish it. Simple as that. I like the first season enough, but I really don't think that it's that good. I don't think it's very good at all, honestly. I think it might be worth one watch through, especially if you're a Simpsons or Futurama fan, but there really isn't enough here to necessitate multiple watches and really even necessitate a recommend from me. So I would put a loose recommendation on this, specifically aimed at Futurama and Simpsons fans. And if you're not in those two groups, I might even say don't watch this. It's disappointing, it really is. I really wanted this to be something special, even though I originally thought it wasn't going to be very good. I really, when I got into it, was hoping that it was going to go somewhere and do something special, because I like some parts of it. I like some things that it does. I like the fact that the world feels sort of unrestricted in a lot of ways. I think the characters have a lot of freedom with this world, and the writers have a lot of freedom to write kind of whatever they want in this world. It's not restricted to anything. So I think that's interesting enough to keep me watching, but really not much else there. So yeah, that's Disenchantment. I decided that every week I'm going to be reviewing something different, obviously, and at the end of the episode, I'll be telling you what I'm going to be reviewing next week or discussing next week. And down in the description, I'll also link whatever I decide to do, and link with an IMDb link. I'll have the title of the movie down there. You can, if you forget what I'm going to be watching and talking about, then you can just look down there, check it out. But next week, I will be discussing a movie from this year. It's called Bomb City. Bomb City, I actually recently watched, and I really want to talk about it. So I'll be talking about that next week. And if you want to listen in and not be spoiled on anything, then I would recommend you watch it as well, and you can come in and listen to the discussion and sort of know what I'm talking about. Be a part of it in a way. Because I'll definitely be spoiling it like I did a lot of this show. So if you want to watch Bomb City and not be spoiled, then just watch it and then come in and listen to me rant about it next week. So yeah, Bomb City next week. And that's all, everybody. I'll see you then.